Top of the middle of the day to you, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We have us a nice little treat here. Basically a brand new 500i, and then we have one over on the right here with the runtime with the saw testing over the months that I've had that thing. The amount of time that it had on it when it got here, we're talking probably about 3 weeks of use. Essentially that'd be falling timber on a daily basis, so quite a number of hours at this point. So it's well broken in, I guess, at this stage of the game is what I'm trying to say with that. And this saw has the Psy-Ko level zip kit on it, about as far as I can go with one of those. This saw is completely bone stock. It's not really broken in necessarily, but I wouldn't say that the tolerance in these new saws is anything to write home about. They're actually pretty sloppy right out of the gate. A lot of the new Stihl chainsaws, especially the stratification engines. So I guess if we want to talk about a kind of a little bit of a brief overview before we start sawing. They are really lightweight and they do have pretty good power straight out of the gate. For a stock saw, I guess, if you want to go down that road. I know that a guy I used to fall timber with on a regular basis called me about the 500i, wondering if there's a way to get some more power out of him, because he's run modified saws for years and years and he's not overwhelmed with the power that they have in stock form, which I'm a little jaded probably as well. I think that in stock form they're one of the best running saws that were ever made, I guess, if you want to talk about it from that perspective. But once you've had an opportunity to deal with saws that have a lot of power, then you're kind of a little bit disappointed sometimes with the stock offerings. If we want to take a trip down memory lane, in the late 70s, the 2100 hit the market, and that saw ran better in stock form than the 56s did. It's just the way it worked. They're up on displacement a little bit, about the same weight, kind of, sort of. I think they weighed a little bit more as well. It had a definitely a better feel the way they were designed. They weren't clunky box shaped, a lot more maneuverable, and they had more power. When the 181s came out, they were kind of a force for what they were, 80cc saw, but the thin ring versions, they ran really good right out of the gate. This is another one of those saws, I guess, if you want to talk about that. I know that the 64s were kind of an interesting concept when they hit the market. That was in about 84 from what I remember. A lot of guys didn't really like them. The 56 crowd, I guess the staunch 56 sympathizers, if you will, they weren't overwhelmed with the 64, but in the right application they actually did a little bit better. If you had to do full man or whatever, they were a little bit better. As far as maneuverability, they were designed much better for that application. So there's been some saws that come out over the years here and there that kind of set the world on its nose a little bit. This is one of those saws. There's a lot of hype about world's first fuel injected saw. That is not accurate. It's the world's first electronically fuel injected saw. Yes, you can say that. First fuel injected saw, no, you cannot say that. I think there's a lot of misinformation along those lines that's being spread out there personally. Johnson had a couple different versions back in the 50s. They were diesel. I'm not that versed on those saws. My buddy Dave belongs to this saw. He's chimed in on the unveiling or the unboxing of this 500i from back in March. 7 months ago, essentially. He sent me this saw. I've had it for a long time. Able to do a lot of saw testing, some sabbaticals out into the wilds, if you will, and so I've had an opportunity to use that in a few different places and definitely have some ideas about it. But if you want to talk about maneuverability, there's one thing I don't like about these saws. One concept, if you want to talk about spring mounts, for example, they're a lot better if you have carpal tunnel or prone to get arthritis. Some guys are like that, some guys are not. White finger crowd's gonna like these over conceptually anything that's hard mounted. But what I don't like, because I do a lot of this when I'm limbing, and so this saw, you can feel it hitting the stops, and this is a lightweight 32. We have some full comp Windsor chain on it, so pretty light ensemble, and yet you can feel it hitting the stops. So this thing flops around. I'm thinking that you can see it. One of the things we got to make note of in this process is something that I did on this particular saw, is I was trying to figure out a way to make this actuation of the nut onto the, I don't know what this molded piece is called, but it's the little molded piece in here. I don't know, the tang, the plastic tang that's molded into the filter base. Upon trying to figure out what to do, I actually added a second little fiber washer in here. That seemed to tighten up the actuation of the nut and makes it a lot more solid. Was trying to think about, I actually had one over the top of it. Helps even better, but it's a real pain to be working on the air filter trying to get it clean. So if we want to talk about support for my flexy flyer situation with the springs, we can see where the cylinder covers gouge this little plastic, well, it's probably a rubber piece in the air cleaner cover, which is trying to keep the rain from getting down on the element itself, as far as I can tell. But you can see it has like gouges in there, and that saw was only run with a, I think the longest he had on it was maybe a 28. I'm not exactly positive. He's going to have to chime in and let us know, but there's enough flex in the spring mount system because those springs are actuated or oriented like this. Basically, they're the one, even the one in the front is running this way, whereas Husqvarna goes this way. So longitudinally, the 500i with the orientation of the springs, it's good longitudinally essentially. Laterally, it's not very strong, and we watch when you're flicking it from one side to the other, you can't necessarily see what's happening. Maybe not as good as it should be or could be shown, but I'm thinking that you can see, maybe even you can hear it if you know what you're listening for, where it actually hits hard enough that it makes a noise as you deal with your maneuvering. So we can watch it right there. So it's one thing that I don't appreciate about that particular saw. There aren't too many others in all actuality. I mean, if you think about it in concept, it's super lightweight. It's not much bigger than like a 272 Husqvarna physically in size. I've had them sitting right on the floor next to one another, which I thought was pretty interesting. So physically, it's not that big. I weighed it on my hand-me-down bathroom scales technically, and it doesn't weigh in the 13-pound, well, the West Coast version doesn't weigh in the 13-pound range. It's in the 14-pound range. So essentially, it doesn't matter when it's lightweight. You don't have anything in the gas or oil tanks, to me, on a personal level, because you're not using a saw with no fuel and no oil. You're going to gas the thing up and go to work. So with that being said, consistently, this saw has come in at 16.8 pounds. It's about a half of a pound lighter than my Torque Monster 461. So pretty substantial weight differential. Thursday afternoon it becomes pretty noticeable. And actually in some applications, that would be ground brush load, ground contour, steepness, maybe even Wednesday. Half a pound's kind of a big deal. In stock form, they run better than a 461, and they run way better than a 462 as well. With the low end concept, they have a little bit more of a low end kind of power in stock form than the 462s, and they have more than the 461. There's a little bit of a differential between those two as well. If you want to talk about fuel mileage, one thing I noticed, they don't do very good on fuel necessarily, especially in zip form. One of the problems is there's the AI, if you will, the controller, is about, it's not a brick, but conceptually it's shaped kind of like a brick, and it's about 3 inches tall, and it's about 1 inch wide to about 1.5 inches wide, and it's about 2 inches or 2.5 inches wide, and it occupies a huge amount of volume possibility in the gas tank right in this area here. Now I'm hoping you can see through the holes in the bottom, but that screw goes into the bottom of the computer module, and it's a pretty good footprint on the bottom. Now, one thing I noticed when I got that saw, with only about 2 weeks of runtime in a falling application, like I mentioned, the amount of wood chip and debris, was overwhelmed at how much was actually in there. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Technically, I was flat in awe. I blew on it and blew on it and blew on it. If you want to take a look at the top of it, you can see where the lead comes out right here. It's clear back here and it's clear up here. So it's about 1.5 inches or so wide up here, about 1 inch wide over here. We kind of already did the bench talk portion, so we'll get into that a little bit more heavily later, I guess, at some point. So I guess essentially, if you're the type of guy that, no offense intended, but kind of a little bit rough on your equipment, you might not actually like this particular saw. It's not a tough feeling platform. I don't think I'd be wanting to knock the undercut out, even if they're kind of just hanging in there. If you just kind of set it on there and slide it out, then well, you might not have any issues. If you're going to be banging on those undercuts, trying to knock them out because they got a little bit of wood left on one side or the other or across the hinge itself, I wouldn't recommend this particular saw for that kind of a guy, I guess. If you're super gentle on your equipment, then I would imagine it's going to be a fine platform. The one thing I wonder about, though, if you're in the bottom of a yarder block, let's say, and they have a, basically the pump is mechanically, it looks like a little carburetor conceptually underneath this bulb right here. And the primer bulb is something that you have to pump to get a little bit of fuel squirted into, through the nozzle, into like the intake circuit, essentially, priming it with raw fuel. This is going to wear out at some point, and you're not going to get a day's notice. It's not going to tell you with the little, I don't know, friendly reminder via a LED light up screen, yeah, this thing's going to be going out tomorrow, you better get it into the shop and get it fixed. What you're going to get is one time it's working and the next time it's got a perforation in it and you're spraying gas on your finger or your glove in your finger, whatever. And so depending on how far you are from the road at that point, it's going to be a little bit of a situation, or at least it has the potential to be a little bit of a situation. In contrast, not necessarily along the same vein, but I've had crap get into the carburetor that's too big to go through an orifice in the jetting circuit, and essentially probably like water. I mean, it mostly happens in the winter. And you can basically set it on a stump, have the thing wide open, and you can back the high-speed needle out until whatever it is that's giving you grief will actually pass through the process, and then you can actually save the day in the bottom of the hole. And technically that's not even an option with one of these saws right here. So technology and advancement is great, but sometimes you get where it's engineered in harder for the end user to be productive out in the woods. If you want to talk about something that's a little bit better design-wise to be easier to deal with certain situations out in the bush, if you will, the old stuff is much better in that regard. Now, we're going to have to run this one against that one and see how she fares. This saw lays waste to a stock 660, 4 or 5 seconds in a 24-inch cut or something stupid. So she actually makes my torque monster 461 a little nervous too. So we're going to cue these two up here pretty soon. But right now we're just going to take a look at these two. In a minute I'm going to pause, get everything warmed up, because that's going to take a while, and then we'll start the saw testing portion of this. Okay, we're warmed up with option number 1, the bone stalker. One thing that I forgot to mention, if you look at this saw, the fit and finish is really nice actually. This part right here is a molded part of the air cleaner cover, and it actually works out pretty well. Your hand fits right here very nicely, the way it's kind of super smooth, and it's actually contoured. The shape isn't boxy at all, it's nice and smooth, so it fits in this area of your palm very nicely. So we can see the lines. Spent a lot of time actually conceptually thinking about and like designing that part of it. I mean, it's kind of a cool looking saw, I would say, for sure. The EDT9, kind of like talked about this thing, it's a little bit of a fiasco dealing with some of the saws. It doesn't do a very good job monitoring these at all. The computer's hypersensitive to monitoring the speed of the crank. Once you zip one of these, you're going to have your chain spot on at all times, because it won't let the saw rev excessively like when you're limbing and stuff. And what happens is it dumps a lot of fuel into the process. From what I can tell, you can hear the richness of the operation, and they suck up the fuel. I did notice that part of it. So anyway, we're pretty warmed up. We're going to take a look at the tack a little bit here for a second. Again, I think I've complained about this tack. The LED readout doesn't stay queued up, if you will, for any length of time. It's kind of a bummer on the design aspect. I'm wishing that it would stay legible for about 15 or 20 seconds, maybe even 30, give you some time to check it out, but it is what it is there. 13.38 is what I saw, the highest. I think that's the highest I've ever seen. Like I said, the computer really struggles keeping the zip saws under control, if you will. And so it's dumping the fuel to the operation as far as I can tell. I'm gonna swap out the bar and chain off camera and get the other one warmed up, and then we'll roll forward. All right, we managed a successful wardrobe change. Now we're gonna take a look at that lateral lack of stiffness on this saw since it has a little bit of time on it. I've asked around if the different versions have different springs in them. I've looked at an IPL. I can't seem to find where they're any different, but this saw flops around even worse than the other one. I think probably because this one has some time on it, but it's like, I'm thinking you can hear it. It's like, so when you're flicking it around, every time you're feeling it, and it's much worse on this saw, hitting the stops. So again, we'll take a look. Springs are positioned this way, so it does have good longitudinal stiffness. It's just not so much side to side. I haven't actually put a 3-foot bar on one of these. I wouldn't even bother with a 3-foot heavyweight personally. Before I forget, these have a little roll pin that limits the movement in the control bolt for the oiler. If you want to run it at max, you're going to have to push that roll pin down into the body of the oil pump itself. It only takes a little bit. I'm pretty gentle with my little punch, and I get kind of a smaller hammer to deal with it. The movement's only 3/16 of an inch or something, not much, and you can actually turn the control bolt through the full range of motion. So as I'm thinking about this process, I come up with little tidbits here and there that I keep remembering about. If we want to talk about the process and the feel, that one feels better. We watched how we can't even get that thing rolling up, monitoring with the tack, because that thing hits the rev limit threshold so quick it you can hear it. It hits that rev limiter in concept. It hits that threshold like that, and it hits it hard. And so, like I said earlier, if your chain isn't absolutely perfect, when they're zipped, you're going to be hitting that rev limiter like that, and you're going to be having a problem, because what I think's happening is it's dumping more fuel into the process. Now, it's about 20-30 inches across right there. We were using the same bar and chain. I'm going to go with we're at least 2 seconds faster both ways, if not 3, with the zip saw versus the stock one. I put a lot of pressure up in the last like 1/2 inch, and you could hear that saw pull down, the engine pull down, but it kept right on moving through the cut nicely. I was actually kind of pleased with that. I guess conceptually, if you can pick up 2 to 3 seconds on a 20 to 24 inch cut with a saw, that's actually saying quite a bit in my humble opinion. And this is a known quantity in stock form, the 500i, for actually really not being a slouch of a saw, and we just saw the zip form pretty much beat it into submission right there. It wasn't a 1/2 second faster, and kind of unfortunately, you can't tell what it feels like with your hand on the pistol grip or the handlebars, but you can definitely feel the difference in the way they pull the chain through the wood. It does a much better job in zip form, although in stock form it's actually doing pretty well also. I'm not necessarily complaining. I already mentioned that saw in the top 3 of all-time best running saws out of the box from what I can tell. That's kind of saying something. There's a lot of new age trickery to get to that place, but it is what it is. All I can do is say I'm gonna hope and pray that my buddy Dave is well pleased with what he gets. I'm gonna make the recommendation, you better pack a 1/2 gallon extra of fuel, a couple of liters anyway, because you're gonna be going through it, buddy. You're just gonna be going through it. All right, so kind of just an overview session, general concept, some of the things that I've noticed about the saw, using it out on the coast, a couple different places inland. There's a lot of things about that saw that are really sweet. There's some things about that saw that I don't particularly care for at all, but I'm only one guy in this process. I'm just giving you what little bit I know. So there you go. Anyway, I'm going to hope and pray that Mr. Dave, go to his YouTube channel. It's Out in the Wood, all run together, all lowercase, Out in the Wood, not woods. Wood is singular. And he's got the little Torque Monster 357. And we ran that in the spring as well. Check the description. I put information in there that I think about that I forget to talk about quite a bit. I'm thinking a lot of people aren't actually perusing that section at all, and so I've had this particular saw since super early March, maybe even late February. We're 7 months into the process right now, I guess, essentially, and so I've had some time to, come up with some ideas about it. But kind of a long, rambling discussion talking about this and that. What makes this thing tick is coming up in the bench talk videos, and we got a lot of saw videos and some falling videos. We're gonna be posting that stuff here and there as time progresses. So anyway, thanks for watching this session. We're in the cool of the evening now. I'm hopeful that you'll have a blessed day wherever you might be on his green earth. And thanks for watching.